Many people today are noticing more and more important details about how the world really works. But few realize that this is just a controlled awakening right on schedule with Bible prophecy. Today's message brought to you by Noticinol.
After collapsing on the football field.
After collapsing in the middle of the game.
Collapsing during the game.
Collapsing on the tennis court.
Suddenly collapsing.
The player collapsed
and died.
After collapsing.
Are you tired of being called a conspiracy theorist? Do you see patterns where other people don't? Are your relationships with your friends and family suffering as a result? Well, then ask your doctor about Noticinol. Noticinol is an FDA-approved drug that helps people afflicted by chronic noticing. It works by suppressing the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking so you can get back to living carefree. Side effects of taking Noticinol may include, but are not limited to, heart attacks, sudden adult death syndrome, storming the Capitol, unironically enjoying late-night television, and in rare cases, Bryant's deltoiditis. People who take Noticinol once a day report up to a 97% decrease in noticing. Do your own research to find out if Noticinol is right for you.
You can't stop coincidences from happening, but you can stop noticing them. And now, for more severe cases, try extra strength Noticinol Jew.
Say goodbye to noticing once and for all. Noticinol.
Welcome to the show, everybody. You're listening to the Dance of Life podcast, and I'm your host, Tudor Alexander. Hope you enjoyed that introduction. Make sure you're not taking any Noticinol like most of the population is, unfortunately. And even more importantly is to not have counterfeit discernment, where you think that you have discernment, but in fact, actually you're being led along into a controlled awakening, which is right on schedule to deceive the world into the final trick. So that's what today is about, and hopefully it will be edifying to you, and hopefully you will listen, and the people around you will also listen so they too can be edified. So what is counterfeit discernment? Well, counterfeit discernment is like discernment, like real discernment, but it's for an agenda. It's twisted in a certain way to give you a half-truth, a particular side of the story, to lead you in a particular way, in a direction. Because if you have the full truth, then you're walking the narrow road, and you're not deceived either to the right or to the left. But counterfeit discernment is giving you some truth. It's revealing to you some important truths, making you feel like there's revelation. But of course, that revelation is controlled revelation, designed to manipulate your emotions, designed to manipulate your actions, your beliefs, so that you can be destroyed. So today is going to be about avoiding counterfeit discernment and gaining true discernment, hopefully. It'll be briefer than my usual videos on these topics, because certainly I've talked about these things quite a bit, but it will be very, very important and hopefully packed with information. If you've watched my videos before, then this video is designed as a resource to you, so that you can share the information with others. Whether you share this video or not, doesn't matter. Just share the information with them. That's what's really important. If you're new here, then this video is an invitation to you. It's an encouragement, and I hope it will pique your interest to do more diligent research, to learn the things that most people will not learn. Most people will be deceived. They will marvel after the beast. They will be wrapped up into the final trick. So I hope that you won't be one of them. I'm going to preface everything by saying the following. In my library, I have about 800 hours worth of content that I've worked very, very difficult times on, and I've worked very hard on over the last 3 or so years of really grinding about 12 hours a day, just lots and lots of research, lots and lots of resources, references, links, articles, books. Half of that amount of content is about on current events and end times research and end times related materials. So what is my point? My point is today is not designed to be a major defense or a dissertation on these topics that I'm talking about today. It's not. Today is more designed to give you a push, an inspiration, an invitation to pique your interest, to look at everything from a big picture view so that you are not deceived and you can do the diligent research. Of course, I've done the heavy lifting for you, but you can do the work and learn what there needs to be learned. We're not going to be looking at Bible verses. We're not going to be looking at lots of books or research articles or any of this stuff. I'm just going to lay things out for you very succinctly, bird's eye view from all of the work that I've done. I'm going to lay it out all for you and make a very important point, hopefully, today. If you want to pursue things further and document yourself and see the receipts and see the research, then I invite you to watch my Synagogue of Satan series. That's about 26 hours. My Dominum Deum Nostrum Papam series. That's Our Lord God the Pope. That's the series on the blasphemies of the papacy. That's about 17 hours. My End Time series, probably over 70 hours. The Great Delusion series, that's over 10 hours. Daniel and Revelation walkthrough, over 12 hours. My ongoing End Times coverage, Venerable Day of the Sun, that's probably something like over 80 hours, at least at the time of this recording, and many, many other such things. So today is not about proving anything to you. It's really not, but rather just laying it out very simply to make a very important point. And that point is, why do you notice only half the problem? With that in mind, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and let them know these important truths. Hopefully, somebody will learn something new today. If you want to support my work, you can go to the website. It's danceoflife.com. You can be a member there if you'd like. That's only $5 a month or $50 a year. Or you can donate if you want. If you feel so called, you can check out the merch store. You can join the chat. You can be part of the shenanigans going on in the chat and all the things we like to talk about. Of course, they're very politically incorrect. And so it's a nice space to meet other people that share these views, and you won't be judged for it. Also, very important announcement. As of the time of this video, my USB library is done. Of course, at the time of this video, I'm still finalizing everything. I'm going to be starting to mail them out pretty soon, but nevertheless, probably by the time you watch it, everything's going to be good to go. So you can order the USB. You can order all of my content so you can have it ad-free and no internet connection required. In fact, I brought a little box with me to show you. It's a nice, cool little branded red box. If you're listening to this, you can check it out on the website. There's a picture of it. There's some pictures we took. And on the inside, there's a branded, little sticker in there with the Dance of Life podcast. And then the USB is this metallic aluminum, really high quality, kind of hard to get the light to shine on it. There we go. Really high quality USB, 512 gigabytes, and it has everything I've ever made, at least in the last 3 years. And again, this is probably my complete library. I don't intend at this point in time adding any major works. So about 800 hours of content, all yours. You can check it out. There's also a AI version that I'm going to be selling with a lot of JSON files, where if you are into that kind of stuff, you can use that to train an AI to basically be a glossary or a librarian on my content. So we can ask it questions and it would answer according to my content, give you timestamps of where I talk about certain things, or you can look things up. It's super, super handy. Obviously, that one's going to cost a little more because it took me quite a lot of time and work to prepare that. But nevertheless, that's available to you. And hopefully, as these things become more accessible, I'll have my own AI that you can basically have as a free, resources just to ask it questions and so on. So anyway, at the current time of this video, that's not feasible financially. But again, by the time you watch this, maybe it is. Who never knows with these things, they change so fast. So anyway, that's available, and hopefully you'll check it out. But the point is this, folks. Many people are waking up to the evils of Zionism, dispensationalism, Israel's infiltration of government, the Zog, Mossad's operations in the world, the evils of the Talmud, all of these things that are so mainstream today, right? Everybody knows about these things now and starting to know. Just 5 years ago, to question the Jews and all of the things I just listed was unheard of. Unheard of. Unheard of. And now here we are in 2025, and everybody's waking up to these things, which is a really important situation. Because on one hand, this is good and needed, certainly, because most Christians, especially in the United States, have been duped by dispensationalism and Judaizing ideas. The evils of Zionist Israel have to be exposed, and people must learn the truth. And the people who are responsible for these things must suffer justice, and they will suffer justice regardless, because God is just. But nevertheless, these perpetrators who have done all these things, like the genocide and all of the other horrible things that I've mentioned, they need to be held accountable, and they will be held accountable because God always appoints one wicked to judge another wicked. So Zionism is collapsing, and of course all of this is important. But, a very big but, while it's very hip and trendy to become a noticer or antiseptic, people don't realize that they're being manipulated into the final trick with these revelations. The reason people don't realize this is because they are ignorant of history. Even the people who do know history only focus on 200 years of history with communism and Zionism. They don't focus on the rest of human history. And Satan's been around for a very long time, folks. You're not going to discern his movements by looking at 3% of human history. So, you can't discern these things unless you have a foundation. And that foundation is Bible prophecy and how it relates to history. And of course, you need more history than just 200 years in order to discern the movements of Satan. Most Christians today have neither history, historical knowledge, nor a biblical foundation. So, of course, God's word will be fulfilled and most people will be deceived. So, my message today is for the people who will listen, who want to know the truth, who are not going to cling to their own opinions and their own emotions, but rather see the bigger picture. And you're willing to learn, you're willing to adjust what you've been told, what you've been fed, and realize that the things that are happening right now are all on schedule. So, the problem. What's the problem? The problem is that the devil is very clever and doesn't put his eggs in one basket. The devil is a master tactician. He's not going to put his eggs in one basket. He's also been around for a very long time, thousands of years, and he's learned lots of tricks. And the Bible also calls him the God of this world, and he controls the institutions, whether they're religious institutions, financial institutions, political institutions. So the devil's never going to be exposed to the masses as the evil, as the source of all evil on mainstream understanding. He's never going to be exposed. There's always going to be a fall guy, a scapegoat, that will be used to point at as the problem where all of the evil originates, or I should say where Satan exclusively works through this group. And of course, today is people's understanding is that that group is the Jews, which is not true. It's not entirely true. Revelation 13 tells you that people are going to worship and marvel, and these two key words, worship and marvel, are extremely important to your understanding of what the end looks like. These set the context for the New World Order. That means you're dealing with a religious situation, a spiritual situation, spiritual delusion, also one that seems good and as the will of God. Who can make war with it? That's what you would say to God. Who can make war with God? And they're marveling. You don't marvel if you're being oppressed. You marvel when you're at ease, when you have comforts, when everything's prosperous. There's the golden age. That's when you marvel. So, these two words, worship and marvel, automatically exclude Zionism, Islam, or communism, which are the three main boogeymen that people point to when they think of the New World Order, the Antichrist power on the earth, etc., etc. So, what does that mean? What does it leave? What does it leave if there's no more Zionism, if Islam is excluded, and if communism is excluded? What does that leave? That leaves Christianity, is what it leaves. The Bible has countless warnings on apostasy, falling away, false prophets, false teachers, false teachings, godlessness appearing as godliness, religious abuses, counterfeit miracles. All of these warnings in the New Testament especially are directed at the church. Because as of the cross and Satan being thrown down to earth, Satan's final attack is going to be internal, not external. It's going to be an issue of counterfeit faith and a counterfeit religious system, not something that's obviously evil like communism, Zionism, or Islam. Unfortunately, many people today have either been duped by dispensationalism, and they think that the attack on the church is going to be external from some sort of communistic situation or an Islamic situation. And of course, they froth at the mouth over the Jews and building a third temple and all the stupid stuff that the Zionists do. Or people have been deceived by preterism, either to the right or to the left. With preterism, they think end times has nothing to do with us. So society is going to keep getting better and better, and we're going to Christianize the world. We're going to conquer the seven mountains for Christ, etc., which of course they're walking right into the final delusion. Or a third option is that people have been suckered by the truther movement with Little Season stuff, Tartaria, reptilians, all these trutherisms that are out there, and they're just totally lost. And they rely on their own understanding and all sorts of fallacies and poor hermeneutics and everything else. So I've addressed all of these topics in very lengthy and detailed presentations, my friends. I really have. So again, today is not about refuting these things or providing a dissertation on my beliefs. It's about looking at the truth. And the truth is that when you interpret the Bible properly through the lens of history, as it was intended to be interpreted, there's only one conclusion. The warnings are about the church being attacked and subverted from the inside by a counterfeit power that will appear as the will of God. The fulfillment of those warnings is Rome and the papacy. And that's very clear. Because Satan gave his throne and power to Rome, which is the beast, which is the papacy, as the continuation of his power through all of these pagan systems from Babylon all the way through Rome. People don't realize that they're under the same pagan system that has come into power from a long time ago, and it's transferred its power as each empire is judged. And of course, God has appointed this final empire to be the longest and to hold power the longest until Jesus returns. So people don't see these things because they're ignorant of Bible prophecy. They're ignorant of history beyond the last 200 years. And unfortunately also today the conservative mainstream is mostly Catholic. All the noticers and the people who are noticing basically all of the things that are happening with the Jews and pointing the finger at all these Antichrist things, which are Antichrist for sure, they're noticing only a fraction of Satan's activities. Only a fraction. And of course, again, most of the pundits these days are Catholic. So you live in one giant Catholic echo chamber, my friends, and that echo chamber is designed to make Catholicism look good and appealing as the solution to Zionism, communism, Islam, extreme capitalism. That's the point. All of these dialectics are there to point as dark hands to point to the light hand that comes and saves you from all these things. But of course, that salvation is destruction. So learn the truth, because that echo chamber is designed to make Catholicism rise to power, and it is rising to power, and it will take power because that's what the Bible predicted. And people will marvel after this system and eventually be persecuted if you don't participate, if you don't obey the pontiff. Just as they did for over 1,000 years of history, through inquisitions, crusades, persecutions, etc., that people unfortunately have forgotten about or they're completely ignorant of. So, what is true noticing? What does it mean to be a true noticer? What am I speaking about here practically? True noticing is seeing the whole picture, not just a fraction of it. It is having true discernment, not counterfeit discernment. True discernment is everything, not just one slice that now puts you off balance in a particular direction. Truth can be used for deception. Do you understand? And if you understand how Satan does that, when Satan tempted Jesus in the desert, he didn't just willy-nilly provide some mystery religion idea. You can be your own God, Jesus. No, he tempted Jesus with the word of God. He tempted Jesus with the truth that's pointed in a particular direction. And that in and of itself is a marvel that Satan uses good for evil. Just like it's a marvel that God uses evil for good. Nevertheless, this is what we're dealing with, folks. True discernment is seeing the whole picture. And because the Bible is the truth and history verifies the Bible, true discernment comes from using the Bible and history together as two witnesses that corroborate each other and seeing what they have to tell us. So what do you get when you do that? Well, you get a couple things. This is a little chart, handy-dandy chart. We'll be looking at several of these things, but this is what you get. And if you're listening to this, this is a chart of the 13 papal families and how they relate to all of these occult agencies like the Zionists, the Jesuits, the Freemasons, the Vatican. Of course, on here, you probably should have, like the Washington, D.C. and, the London, the Bank of London and all this stuff. So, don't be legalist about this. Don't be dogmatic about this. But here's the thing that most people miss. These 13 families, de Medici, Colonna, Windsor, Romanov, Pallavicini, Torlona, Massimo, Cavendish, Farnese, Rothschild, all of these are the elite ruling families that all ultimately serve the devil. And under them, they have various institutions. One of them happened to be the Zionists. One of them happens to be the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Freemasons. And you could probably fill this with 100 more organizations, Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, all these different organizations in time and through history. It doesn't matter. What matters is people just look at this. So if I just zoom this in, let's zoom it in like hardcore. This is what they do. I say, this, here you go. Here we go. There you go. That's what people do. You see? They zoom in. They say, this is the world's problems right here. This is everything evil that's ever happened in history, and this is the exclusive way that the devil works in the world. And the devil is laughing his ass off at all of these people being noticers, because all you're noticing is just one little tiny box. And outside of that box is a very big satanic system with many, many threads. And that little box that you're looking at is being collapsed on purpose so that all of this can now serve the beast agenda and move people back to religion, back to quote unquote traditional values, the family, Sunday sacredness, obeying the pontiff, religion and the state being united, theocracies, all of that. And all you're doing is just looking at a tiny little box. So that's true discernment, is to see the whole picture, folks. But you don't see the whole picture if you are blinded by mainstream pundits and counterfeit discernment, where you're looking at only 200 years of history. The devil has been around for thousands of years. And these people right here, Massimo, Farnese, Colonna, Windsor, Roma, they trace their lineage all the way back to Babylon and beyond. Okay, they're very particular about their genealogies. So if they see the history, the importance of history, why don't you? Very important point. Anyone who doesn't talk to you about the black nobility, the papal families, the Jesuits, the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, various Catholic orders, they're just giving you part of the truth. Now, whether they're giving part of the truth to you to manipulate you and to withhold it intentionally, or maybe they're just ignorant, I don't know. Certainly there's both in the world, and that's why you have to have true discernment. People notice the Jews, but they don't notice the Catholics. You notice the evils of the Talmud, but you don't notice the blasphemies of Catholicism. Infant baptism, transubstantiation, papal supremacy, the pagan Sabbath, praying to the dead, purgatory, indulgences, priesthood mediation, immaculate conception, idolatry, work salvation. You don't notice any of those blasphemies when they're equally as blasphemous as the Talmud. The Talmud is very obviously evil, but blasphemy is blasphemy, my friends. And Catholicism is full of them. Especially its maximized sin over the course of the last 2,000 years has gotten worse and worse. You notice pentagrams and Baphomets on old Jewish books with Kabbalah magic on them. But you don't notice the continuation of pagan empires through the Catholic Church. You see the giant pine cone, occult symbolism from Sumeria in St. Peter's Square with the giant, awakened pine cone that the Anunnaki would use, and they have all these engravings with pine cones. You see a giant pine cone in St. Peter's Square. You see a giant Egyptian obelisk, just like in Washington, D.C., and just like in the city of London, which is traditionally used for Baal worship, sun worship. And of course, around that giant obelisk, which was taken from Egypt and put into Rome, because Satan continued his power into Rome from these pagan empires, around that sun-worshipping obelisk, this phallic symbol, you see a giant solar wheel, this 8-pronged solar wheel in St. Peter's Basilica. You see the Temple of Saturn right across the street from the Vatican. You see the blatant idolatry of Catholicism bowing down to statues or worshiping the Eucharist. You see the sun-moon occultic rituals and imagery when it comes to the Eucharist, with the monstrance, with the half moon, and the sun is in that, which is basically a fertility symbol of the sun and the moon procreating and having sex magic. You see the seal of Baal and the seal of Vatican compared side by side, and they're practically the same image. You see dead body parts and people going to pilgrimages where there's cut off heads and fingers and foots, thinking that they're going to receive a blessing from God, which all of this is pagan. You see the fact that the Pope carries a Babylonian title, which is Pontifex Maximus, which is a continuation of the ruling God-man through time, all the way from Babel, with Nimrod, through Babylon, through Greece, through Persia, through Rome, and of course, ultimately the papacy. The papal mitre, which is similar to Dagon, and the hooked cane. All of these are pagan realities, folks. There's a exoteric explanation that's given to you. Oh no, it means this, and it's about Christ and the shepherd and yada, yada, yada. And there's an esoteric meaning, which of course is hidden only to the initiated. There's lots of strange things underground the Vatican and their catacombs, and they have secrecy and massive libraries that nobody even knows what's in there. There's lots of people talking about there's tunnels between Jerusalem and the Vatican and other places with human trafficking. Lots of this stuff is on the internet, folks. You can find it easily. But why don't people talk about it? Why don't you notice that? You certainly notice all the things that the Jews do. You notice all the perversion of the Talmud with their rabbis and their circumcision practices where they're sucking baby penises and trying to get some adrenochrome from that experience. and all of the abuses that go on with Orthodox Judaism that are very common, with all the cults that are caught basically doing all sorts of sexual abusive situations. There's plenty of stories about that, absolutely. But you don't notice the hundreds of thousands of sex abuse cases of the Catholic Church. In fact, there's probably millions, because we've only learned about these things in the last few decades. So considering the Catholic Church has been around for a very long time, and there's nothing new under the sun, you're probably looking at millions of sex abuse cases. And of course, there's many, many that are continuing to be discovered. Never mind all of the Catholic organizations involved in trafficking and abusing grant money, which of course you can look into that. You notice the Jews bleeding out the body of Christ in history through blood libel, poisoning the whales, communism, forced immigration into white countries. You see all that. But you don't notice Catholicism doing the same thing. Pagan Rome killed tens of thousands of Christians brutally by feeding them to lions, crucifying them, torturing them to death. And yet pagan Rome was white. They were white Europeans. And of course, Catholic Rome is what evolved out of pagan Rome, and they killed tens of thousands of people too, possibly hundreds of thousands over the centuries with their inquisitions. There's different numbers. People, the Protestants say Rome killed 50 million people. I don't know if it's that high. Could be. But certainly it's not, a couple thousand, which is what the Catholics will say. So tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, alone in St. Bartholomew's Days Massacre, the St. Bartholomew Days Massacre. That alone killed tens of thousands of Protestants, slaughtered them to death because they didn't want to bow down to the papacy. Never mind other genocides like the Cathar genocide. Now, the Cathars can't be called Christians. They were Gnostics of some kind. But that doesn't give you the authority to go and slaughter them and genocide them. And yet they were killed. The Crusades killed thousands of people. And of course, you also don't know about the Eastern Orthodox being sacked by the Crusaders, Constantinople being sacked, and thousands of people being slaughtered by the Crusaders. So you don't notice that, do you? You don't notice the Children's Crusade and the various children's crusades that happened because of all these false prophets that were rallying children to go to the promised land, when in fact all that happened was they either died of starvation or they got abused and taken into slavery and trafficked. You don't notice that communism was developed by Jesuits in South America through their reductions, how they enslaved the Guarani Indians and basically had them worship them as demigods, how they had a theocratic Catholic communist state in South America in many places. And they practiced that for 150 years before the French Revolution. And then after the French Revolution, when secularism entered the world, they brought communism to so many countries. Yes, were the Jews involved? Absolutely. But that's only that tiny little box. You got to look at the big picture, because the Jesuits were very involved in spreading communism to the world. You don't notice the Catholic organizations, like Catholic Charities, that are steeped in fraud abuses and abusing grant money and dealing all sorts of shenanigans with immigration and trafficking, which are just basically fronts for all of these illicit activities. You don't notice that. You notice that Jews are in positions of power in government, but you don't notice that Catholics are in power. The Supreme Court is mostly Catholic. The presidential cabinet has probably more Catholics than ever before. J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Linda McMahon, Carolyn Leavitt, John Ratcliffe, RFK Jr., Elise Stefanik, Sean Duffy, all Catholic. There's Knights of Malta members in the CIA, the FBI, in government positions. In fact, the FBI was started by a Bonaparte, and the father of intelligence, Bill Donovan, was a Knight of Malta. Did you know that? One of the signers of the Constitution was a Jesuit, John Carroll. Elite Catholic family, Jesuit trained, very likely a Jesuit. So the Jesuits were in on it from the very beginning. Georgetown University, the first Jesuit base camp in the United States to make sure everything goes according to plan. The Maryland property, where everything is based, where D.C. was formed. Maryland, land of Mary. That was owned by the Jesuits. The Pentagon is modeled after Villa Farnese in Italy, which is one of the papal family's fortresses. Of course, there's countless Roman symbologies in America. The eagle, the fasci, like if you look at the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, he's got two fasci on the chair. Of course, you know history, then you know that the Jesuits assassinated Abraham Lincoln. So what does that tell you? They tell you that they immortalized his death and sitting down on a Roman throne to show you who ultimately calls the shots. You notice that all of the government officials that we have are bowing down to the Wailing Wall. And there's so many pictures of every government official putting their little Jew hat on and bowing down to the Wailing Wall. And yet, you don't notice that every president after the Civil War, when this country was subverted, has bowed down to the papacy and has taken pictures with the papacy. Every single one of them, Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. They always have a picture with the Pope, and they never speak against the papacy. And yet, if you study the founding fathers, they hated the papacy. They wanted to get away from the papacy. They wanted nothing to do with Romanism and papism and Jesuitism. And they knew that the Jesuits would infiltrate this country and subvert it and make it into a Catholic weapon. You notice the Jews are behind conspiracies, but you don't notice the Catholics are also behind them. Jesuits, the Vatican, Knights of Malta, Catholic orders of various kinds involved in countless political intrigues throughout history. Knights of Malta are a sovereign state with their own currency. Why? When they're supposed to be just a friendly order of religious people trying to do charity work for everybody. A knight is a defender of a kingdom, my friends. You don't need to be a knight unless there's a kingdom that you're needing to defend. Of course, why is that the case? If you understand these things and you have true discernment, you realize that Catholicism is not a religion first, it's an empire first, disguised as a religion, because it is the continuation of the pagan empires from Babylon. It is Satan's seat of power, disguised in false light and hiding in plain sight. That's why. Why do Jesuits have a general? You ever think about that? Napoleon says that the Jesuits weren't just a fraternal order of, humble priests, but rather a military order. And they have a general because they're the military wing of the Vatican. Why were Jesuits kicked out of countless countries, just like the Jews? You notice the number 109, 109, 109. 109 countries, 109 countries. The Jews were kicked out of 109 countries. Well, guess what? The Jesuits were kicked out of many, many countries too. You know why? Because they would foment revolutions. They would spy through their confessionals. They would assassinate rulers. They were doing all kinds of shenanigans. So you don't notice that part, do you? You notice Jews like Larry Fink or Yuval Noah Harari in the World Economic Forum and all of their antichrist policies. But you don't notice that Klaus Schwab is Catholic, or that the Vatican has a permanent observer status in the United Nations, and that the Jesuits are the ones who created the United Nations through the League of Nations, with people like Teilhard de Chardin. The Jesuits are the ones who created all of these Antichrist New World Order situations. And the fact that the Vatican has an observer status at the UN should tell you who is in charge of the UN, even though the UN is pegged as a deep state, globalist, liberal, whatever, type of situation. You notice the Jews are behind the assassinations of various people with the Mossad, but you don't notice the Jesuits also are doing assassinations. In the time between the founding of this country and the Civil War, which is about 80 years, you have 8, count them, I don't have 8 fingers, but 8 presidential assassinations. One of them was a failed assassination. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both killed on the same day, July 4th, 1826. Monroe killed 5 years later on July 4th, 1831. Do you think that was on purpose, to give a message to America? Andrew Jackson, they tried to kill him, they failed. Harrison Tyler Buchanan assassinated. Lincoln assassinated. And how many times did they try to implement a central bank in the United States? So until ultimately, after the Civil War, and they fomented the Civil War, they were able to do that. People throw memes around. I saw, for example, about Ben Franklin, because I see some of these channels that are hardcore, like, noticers, right? And they had this meme of Ben Franklin and, watch out for the Jews, or whatever quote he had about the Jews. And that's fine and well, but there's no memes that people throw around of Thomas Jefferson or John Adams warning about the Jesuits coming to infiltrate the country and to destroy everything. They don't have any memes about that. Why? When we're talking about history, that's a relevant part of history. After they fomented the Civil War, the Jesuits, Freemasons, Jews, everybody was involved to destroy this country. They sold the country to the Rothschild. Act of 1878. Then pretty soon, 50 years later, you had the Federal Reserve and so on. But the Rothschilds are the papal bankers. You can look it up today. Guardians of the papal treasury. Rothschild. What does it mean? Red shield. Who wears a red shield? The Roman Empire wears a red shield. So things are not what they seem, folks. The Jesuits were involved with Kennedy's assassination also, but people blame Mossad. The Jesuits were kicked out of countless countries for all their assassinations, like the gunpowder plot of 1716, I forget the year now, but in the 17th century, where they tried to kill the entire parliament and the King of England. Countless assassination attempts with various monarchs that didn't want to play ball with the Pope, or they were Protestant and ripping away from the Catholic Church. They used their confessionals, again, to create an intelligence network. That was the original CIA, folks, to have the confessionals, and there were confessors to the kings, and the kings would tell them all their dirty secrets, and then they would tell each other, and they would have a ultimate spy network across Europe, all under the guise of the will of God. They fomented revolutions like the French Revolution. They brought communism to many countries. Sometimes they used Jewish puppets, obviously. That's very clear in history. The Jews cannot be divorced from communism, but it's not that clear. It's a little more nuanced. Castro is from a papal bloodline. The Jesuits groomed Mao. Very much proof of that. The Jesuits brought communism to South America twice, because the first time was with their reductions, and the next time was through communism. You notice the Jews in banking, in pharma, and in other such things, but you don't notice the Catholics in these same places. The Knights Templar developed the international banking system as we know it after hoarding lots of money in the Crusades, and so they needed to have deposits, and so they created the checking system. The Jesuits also hoarded countless billions, probably in today's money, maybe even more, from their 150 years of reductions in South America, where they basically took all of the spoil of these people's labor. They would have all of the people submit their, earnings for the day, and then the Jesuits would redistribute it for them so that everybody has a fair price. And of course, they would redistribute minimal amount, and they would keep most of it, and they were hoarding, tons of money. That's why the Spanish monarchs kicked them out of the country. And that moved along the plan, and they had to create a revolution to topple monarchy, because the monarchs started to get wind of what they were doing in South America, and so it was no good. So they moved all their assets to the Rothschilds, they created a French Revolution, toppled monarchies, and of course the rest is history. The Rothschilds are papal bankers, and they are married to a papal family, the Aldobrandini, and probably others too. You can look into it yourself. The Jesuits were the first to perfect projections onto walls and to shape Europe and shape European cultures with theaters. The Hollywood, which when it was started was actually a Catholic situation originally. It was promoting the Catholic ideal, and it was very much a Jesuit situation. Of course, eventually they gave it to the Jews, and they allowed it to liberalize like everything else, because the last 80 years has been about liberalization, the liberal world order. And now there's a scapegoat to revamp Hollywood and to turn it back to good old Christian values. The Jesuits are behind the creation of the League of Nations and the United Nations. They were heavily involved in international drug trafficking through the CIA, through other organizations, through proxy organizations like the Knights of Malta, etc., etc. All these things are woven together in a very shadowy shadow government that works behind the scenes. The Jesuits shaped the charismatic movement and the Jesus revolutions through people like Catherine Kuhlman and many others. The Jesuits are behind the New Age movement with people like Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit, who also was involved in the United Nations, who had the whole Omega Point theory, the one world order coming to a one single point. The Jesuits created the liberal Vatican II, and interestingly enough, also authored the very first book on sedevacantism. So they have the left and the right. The Jesuits created the Big Bang and heliocentrism, which basically allowed NASA to justify all of its shenanigans and deception. If you look into the moon, there are 33 craters named after Jesuits. That should tell you everything about cosmology and Jesuitism. The Jesuits have been accused of doing more black magic than anyone in history by Helena Blavatsky, who was a servant of the devil. So why would she lie about these things? She was telling the truth. And of course, if somebody who worships the devil tells you that, then what more can we say about this organization? Opus Dei, Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the Koch Foundation, the John Birch Society, the Moral Majority, Peter Thiel, Kevin Roberts, Catholics and Catholic organizations and other Catholic projects influencing culture, loyal to the Pope, regardless of whatever happens and regardless of what people think. All of these situations are loyal to the Pope and to the papacy, and they're driving culture towards the New World Order, which will be Catholic. It won't be Jewish, it won't be communist, and it certainly won't be Muslim. Everyone notices Alex Karp, the Jew CEO of Palantir. But nobody seems to notice that the Pope is saying we need a moral compass for AI, and how the media is saying, oh yes, the Pope is so reasonable about regulating AI and bringing it under the reign, basically, of Catholic morality, which is what it's going to be used. AI, right now, at the time of this video, is kind of running amok, and that's on purpose. Eventually, people are going to cry out for a moral regulation of this technology, and that technology will be subservient to the beast. You notice Jewish executives in Warner Brothers and Walt Disney, but you don't notice that mainstream conservatism is a Catholic echo chamber. Matt Walsh, Catholic. Candace Owens, Catholic. Russell Brand, Catholic. Laura Ingraham, Catholic. Steve Bannon, Catholic. Nick Fuentes, Catholic. Megyn Kelly, Catholic. Piers Morgan, Catholic. General Flynn, Catholic. Rupert Murdoch, he's a quote-unquote Protestant, but he's knighted by the Pope, which of course tells you everything. He's donated millions to Catholic causes. Well, you tell me how that works. Jordan Peterson, he's married to a Catholic, and he's probably going to be Catholic pretty soon. Turning Point USA is now head up by a Catholic, Erica Kirk, who is a Knight of Malta. So there you go. And then, of course, you have your token Protestants like Tucker Carlson and Matt Gaetz, who are there just to make you feel like there's variety. But wake up, folks. Wake up. If all of these people were Jews, okay, if all of the people in the conservative mainstream were Jews, what would people say? But because they're Catholic, oh, suddenly the blinders are on and I don't see it. I'm just looking at that little box of Zionists. You notice all the Zionist interests in destroying Christian eschatology through things like dispensationalism, Schofield, Oxford Press, Rothschilds, etc. Everybody knows about these things now. But you don't notice that the origin of these things is in the Jesuits. Manuel Lacunza, Robert Bellarmine, Francisco Ribera, all of these created modern dispensationalism to destroy Protestant religion and to destroy everybody and bring them back to the Catholic Church. Luis de Alcazar shaped modern preterism as it is today, simultaneously as these other ones are focusing on futurism to shape everything either to the left or to the right and deceive people. And don't look in history because you might find the truth. Manuel Lacunza, who published his commentary on Revelation, published his commentary as a Jew. Yosef ben Ezra, he published his commentary as a Jew. Why? That should tell you everything, my friends, so that the Jews can be the scapegoat. So he published his commentary as a Jew, and of course his commentary landed in the lap of people like Irving and Darby, and they fell in love with it, and the rest, as they say, is history. I document that all in my various series. You notice that the Jews are in every liberal aspect of society. Communism, trannies, LGBTQ, abortion. You notice all of these are dominated by Jews. But you don't notice that the Catholics and Protestant papal puppets in society that are pushing ecumenism, false religion, union of church and state, you don't notice that. People like Kenneth Copeland, Paula White, Joel Osteen, Rick Warren, which of course these are all old generation people. There's a new generation. But nevertheless, people like them who are papal puppets taking pictures with the Pope, getting their reward for influencing culture with their ecumenical ideas and their delusions, charismatic NAR delusions. You have Catholics like Kevin Roberts, who are part of the Heritage Foundation, Opus Dei. And now, look in history, we're not even a year at the time of this video into the Trump administration, and almost half of Project 2025 is complete. Almost half. Influencers like Charlie Kirk, who pushed an ecumenical reality with lukewarm events, lukewarm pastors like Sean Foyt, who were from Bethel and doing all sorts of wrong things, Zionism, all of this lukewarm ecumenical stuff to bring everybody into a one world mentality where we need religion to be on top of the state. Of course, Charlie Kirk has passed away now, but the point is that this is all part of the plan, folks, but people don't notice that because it's clean cut. It seems good. It seems like the will of God. Seems nice and friendly. Golden Age. We like that. We don't like the evil, big, bad, dark Jews and their communist, Zionist, LGBTQ stuff. We like the other side that's got false religion and blaspheming God under the guise of following the will of God. We like that. Neither to the left nor to the right, says the Bible. Don't go either to the left or to the right. Over 18 times, at least that I could count. But turn your foot away from evil, i.e. walk the narrow road. So, now, why do you notice only half the problem? With the recent Charlie Kirk assassination, as of the time of this video, if his wife was a Jew, if his wife was named Erica Steinberg or Erica Goldstein, what would people think? Just be honest. Be honest. If you're honest, you would say that people would be very, very suspicious. Israel honeypot, she was in on it. Oh, but, she's Catholic, she's goody two-shoes, quote unquote. No. Not possible. Not possible. Do you see the problem? This is the problem, folks. Everything I've told you is documented in many places. And besides that, you can read for yourself lots of books Two Babylons by Alexander Hyssop, Secret Terrorists by Bill Hughes, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements by Nesta Webster, Hitler's Pope by John Cromwell, Jesuit Hollywood by Sean Wilcock, Vatican Assassins by Eric John Phelps, Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy, Scarlet and the Beast, A History of the War Between English and French Freemasonry by John Daniel, books by Giovanni Cerrucci, he's a good author on these topics, and of course many others. Is it a stretch of the imagination that what you're seeing is actually the result of two hands working together? A destroying hand and an integrating hand, a dark hand and a false light hand. Is that a stretch of the imagination? Because you can see several pictures for yourself. This is the structure of Freemasonry. Okay, here's your pyramid. And on that pyramid, you have two sides. You have the Scottish Rite and you have the York Rite. 33 steps on one and 13 steps on another. But if you look very close, you can see that the York Rite at the top, what are the highest orders of the York Rite? Order of Knights Templar. Where do you think they get that from? Order of the Knights of Malta. Here's your little solar cross. There they are. Does that look like anything you've seen before? Yeah, and they have little crosses on. This is the Synagogue of Satan, my friends, and I talk about it quite a bit in my series. Synagogue of Satan is not just that little tiny Jewish box. It is a giant box of counterfeit threads. People who proclaim to be worshiping God on one side. On the outside, they're a Jew, they're a Muslim, they're a Christian. Oh yeah, we love God, we worship God. When in fact, behind, they have their little secret orders and their secret outfits. And their little secret rituals. Which of course, at the very top, they pledge their allegiance to the God of this world. So this is what you're dealing with, folks. Another one that's nice you can look at. This is another rendition of this idea. We have you have the compass and the square. And on the compass, you have two rings. You have the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. And at the very top, what do you have? You have the Order of the Knights Templar. It's interesting that cross looks like the Jehovah's Witnesses symbol, at least the first one that they had. Order of the Red Cross, Order of the Knights of Malta. Of course, on this side, so you have the Jewish side. You see the Jewish side? And you have the quote-unquote Christian side. This is the Christian side. They're both two sides of the same devil bird, folks. And if you understand the history of Freemasonry, you understand how this came to be. The original Freemasons were Jews. Freemasonry is a Jewish thing. It came from Judaism with all of their occult Kabbalah knowledge. And of course, they were very skilled Masons. They were actual Masons. And they conveyed esoteric beliefs through the things that they built. And that was a Jewish thing. The Knights Templar corrupted themselves in the Crusades when they went to Jerusalem and got into Kabbalah, into all sorts of very naughty things. And as a result, they were persecuted. They were burned at the stake, and some of them fled and escaped. And they went up in different places, one of them being, Scotland, Ireland, England, all that whole area. And eventually they met up with the Jewish Freemasons, and they formed today what is called the speculative Freemasonry. Because before you had operant Freemasonry, which is meaning you had to be an operator, meaning you had to be an actual Mason. Speculative Freemasonry are people who are not Masons, but they're in Freemasonry. And it becomes this esoteric thing where you're building and creating and, having, businesses and banking and all this, other stuff that they do today. So it becomes a philosophical adventure. And of course, when the Templars and the Jews mixed, you have modern Freemasonry. That's why you have two rings to the ladder. You have the quote-unquote Christian side, and then you have the quote-unquote Jewish side. But they're all serving the same devil bird. So, just like the Templars were friendly with the Jews and did lots of business with them, because the Jews were, had money to lend and they could exchange various things, the Templars were very friendly with the Jews, despite other cultural attitudes being against the Jews at the time. Just like the Templars mixed with Jewish Freemasons to create modern Freemasonry, just like some of the original Jesuits and Inquisitor were Jewish, just like there were papal court Jews in high positions doing the bidding of the papacy and in the court, and the royal court, just like there were many crypto Jews and conversos in Europe, just like the Illuminati was made through Protestant crypto Jew Adam Weishaupt and the Jesuits, just like the Rothschild families married to the papal families through the Aldobrandini and many others, I'm sure. Just like the CIA and FBI were founded by Catholic interests and were full of Knights of Malta members, and they work with the Mossad, who is Jewish. Is it any stretch of the imagination that what you're seeing is one giant theater? If you're a true noticer, then you will notice what I say, and you will desire the full truth on these things. If you want depth, not just surface level information that caters to your flesh and gives you a little thrill and makes you feel like you're on the in crowd and caters to your hatred, if you want the full truth, then it's there for you. Satan has many tentacles in the world, my friends. He has many tentacles. And of course, Zionism, Talmudic Judaism, Kabbalah, they're definitely one of them. He has many tentacles, and those are definitely some of them. But this is the big but of today. They're not the exclusive way that Satan acts in the world. People like Nick Fuentes or Candace Owens or anybody else who are very extreme and pointing out all of the evils of the Jews, which I'm fine with in that regard. But I'm not fine because they also use that to build trust and ultimately lead you back to the Pope, which is what they're designed to do. They're Judas goats. These people want to paint reality with a very biased brush. It's hot and trendy to blame the Jews for everything these days, but people forget that Satan has had countless kingdoms and powers throughout history, folks. That's why I said if you want to discern the movements of the devil, you're not going to get it by looking at 3% of the human history. He's had South American pagan continent empires for thousands of years. He's had the Indo-European paganism through Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Catholicism, Jesuitism, Freemasonry, secret societies, communism, Islam. How many empires has Satan had over the last thousands and thousands of years? Countless. He's the God of this world. It's a very wide world of evil. However, the Bible tells you a very critical key point in Revelation 13:8. And that critical key point is that the devil gave his throne and power and great authority to the beast. So, the Bible reveals to you that out of all of the shenanigans and tentacles and distracting noise and stuff like this in the world, which the devil does, so you're looking left, you're looking right, you're looking up and down, you're looking down, you can't figure out where the center of the heart of darkness is. The Bible says, here it is, bing, shines a nice, bright little ray of light right on top of the papacy, which of course the papacy is the center of light in the world, false light. Nobody would suspect the papacy. Unless, of course, you actually have discernment, then you see through all of these things very clearly so. It's very obvious. But most people don't have discernment. So Satan operates his power and his kingdom in broad daylight. And all of these other tentacles are going to be subverted to make the kingdom that he's given his throne to look like the victor, look like the savior that's coming to save you with reasonable ideas and Catholic social teaching, save you from all of the evils of capitalism, the evils of communism, the evils of Zionism and Islam, and yada, yada, yada. That's why all roads lead to Rome, my friends, and everything is going to be integrated to Rome. Satan has actually woven the Jewish and Roman thread together in many times and in many places. When the Jews united with Rome to kill Christ, and they said, we have no king but Caesar, their fate was sealed. Ever since then, both groups have been killing the true body of Christ in different ways. The Jews are the dark destroying hand that is very obvious, and of course Catholicism is the false light saving hand that integrates and that is not as obvious unless you have biblical discernment. After the cross, Jewish and Roman threads were weaved more and more together because they're both Antichrist. In 1100, the Templars, like I said, discovered Kabbalah, they corrupted themselves, and then eventually they fled persecution, and they met up with the Jews and created modern Freemasonry. In the 1500s, many of the original Jesuits were Jews. I don't think Loyola was a Jew. Some people say he was. I haven't found convincing evidence. He might have been, descended from some conversos in several generations before him, but nevertheless, there were many Jesuits that were Jews. And of course, if you understand, the fact that there was crypto-Judaism at the time, that's also interesting. The first inquisitor was a Jew, Torquemada. He was a crypto-Jew. In the 1700s, the Rothschild family unites with the Jesuits as the banking arm of the beast. That's another union. Of course, in between that and the modern day, you have lots of marriages between the Rothschilds and the papal families to seal that union. In the 1900s, you had the Vatican II liberalizing Catholicism and basically making it very, very pro-Jewish, very, very friendly with the Jews. That was maximized with Pope Francis, and of course, that's starting to swing back. So this is what it is, folks. Things are not as black and white as they seem, and they're not as black and white as people like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes like to make it. With all of this happening and the Jews and Zionism basically being exposed and all of this being, collapsing, the Jewish identity is going to be collapsed and the Jews will be converted. They'll be converted. There'll be some false signs and wonders in the Middle East. Who knows how exactly it's going to go down? I certainly have certain theories and the things that I've produced, but the point is the end. The point is the end. The Jews will be converted because that is their destiny. Satan has gave his throne and power to one institution, and everybody needs to be woven back in. So now it's time to collapse these threads and build rapport with the public and say, oh, look, there's Zionism. There's all the evil with the Zionists. And then once you trust that, then the Zionists have to convert and everybody comes back to the Catholic Church. We've made it. We've gotten to the golden age. And of course, that's really the final trick. The real truth actually is that the weaving of these two groups began in Babylon. When Israel was taken into captivity, they picked up a lot of things from Babylon. The Kabbalah, mysticism, various, traditions that they have today, all of that began in Babylon. The temple was destroyed, so they had to create synagogues. And in the synagogues, you started to have the religious system of Judaism. I talk about this quite a bit, but this is what happened. Judaism started to come out of Babylon and evolve into all these practices that you have today. By the time Greece came around, and that was the dominant empire, you had Hellenization pushing on them to basically, be influenced by various pagan ideas and counterfeit ways of being. The Greeks also had their mystery religions as well. And of course, by the time Rome took power, and that's the main power, we already talked about that, how basically the Jews and the Romans were fused together. We have no king but Caesar. So there you go. Your fate is sealed. So what's the point? If someone is talking to you about the Jews, that's fine. But if they're not talking to you about Rome and Catholicism and the Knights Templar and the Jesuits and all these other things that we've talked about, they are misleading you, either intentionally or unintentionally. That's the point. When practically all of your conservative pundits are Catholic, and you don't notice that, and you don't see the significance of that, you're deceived. You're not a noticer. You're just a puppet. You're noticing what they want you to notice. So, ever since the French Revolution, they have clogged history and the news cycle with more and more problems and noise by way of proxies, various proxies, so that you don't figure out who the power is behind the scenes. And people get so lost in all these secret societies and the history of secret societies and all of the, various orders of evil that have been throughout the last hundreds of years. But that's not the point, folks. The Bible gives you such a easy, very clear distinction of where Satan has centralized his power during the church age. And if you understand how to relate Bible prophecy to history, it's abundantly clear where that center is, because that center is Rome. So, you don't have to be a historian, you don't have to be a theologian, but you do have to know the truth. And all of this is designed so that you don't know the truth. It's designed to confuse you with noise and proxies and revolutions. So you say, no, it's the Jews. Oh, it's the New Agers. No, it's the Freemasons. It's these, it's that. And you don't understand that it's a big picture. And what is that big picture? How does that relate to the Bible? Because you need an objective standard of truth. All of these people that are pundits today, conservative pundits, do not use the Bible as their foundation. And if they do quote from the Bible, they're not certainly using it in context. So be a true noticer, because soon the world will be deceived by the ultimate trick. What's happening with the Jews right now is all part of the plan, my friends. You're never, if Satan is the God of this world, just think critically now, okay? Think very critically. If Satan is the God of this world, and he's the most subtle being that God ever created, that's pretty subtle. And he's been around for thousands of years, scheming and having power, and God has given him the authority to exercise power. Do you think that the world is going to figure out what the devil is doing, what he's actually doing, okay? The world is not going to figure out what he's actually doing. The world's going to see what he wants you to see. Oh, look at these big bad Jews. They're coming to take over with Noahide laws and Zionism. They're going to get you. You better rebel. You better deny them. And eventually, that's what's going to happen. Do you think the world is going to notice the devil? No. The world will be deceived by the devil. So, be a true noticer. Don't be one of these people. And learn the truth, because Satan is the God of this world and he will deceive most people. But hopefully you won't be one of them, and hopefully you will help others learn these things, because the people who God is determined to save will not be deceived. We don't know who those people are. So we go out into the world, we focus on the purity of the message, we proclaim the truth, and those who will hear, will hear. So I hope that I've inspired you today to do something. I hope I've inspired you to learn the truth, to be curious, to hunt for the truth, to see the bigger picture, to not just look at the little Zionist box, but to see the big picture, to learn these things on a deeper level and to share them with others. And certainly, again, I've done all of the heavy lifting for you. All you have to do is watch my presentations, go use the information, go present it yourself and use the resources that I've put together. I don't care, but learn the truth. And again, I'm happy to support you. If that's the case, if you need support, you can email me at tudor@danceoflife.com. Happy to support you. But otherwise, we need to learn the truth because there's not much time. There's not much time, folks. So be a true noticer and don't just notice only a tiny part of the problem. We'll see you next time. Take care and God bless.
תלמיד ישיבה הולך עם תספורת מעליות. זה תספורת של גוי, של יהודי? גוי. תספורת שוקו-וניל. זה יהודי או גוי? גוי. בלורית. זה תספורת של יהודי או גוי? גוי. מכנסיים. צמודים כמו נקניקיה מסלוסי. זה גוי או יהודי? זה גוי. שתי מקלות של מטאטא של סנוקר הולכות. אדם גנב! אדם גנב!
מה יש לך? למה את בוכה?
אין לי מושג! אוי! מה יש לך? גרביונים עם כוכבים. שמעתם? פעם כוכבים חשבתי רק בשמיים. הם ירדו לגרביונים. משקה חדש יצא. פסיפלורה משוגעת. ראשי תיאבון פסיכי מטומטם. גימטריה אבל. יש כאלה צועקים.